Robert, if you would leave those verses up there, I will read them in just a moment. Before I do, Patrick, thank you so much for bringing us that passage out of Isaiah. A purifying work of charcoal or of coal in Scripture. And understanding that as sinful people, we've committed sin, but the only reason we can stand before God is because He has purified us. He has made us clean, and that is an amazing fact that brings us together to worship Him. If you've lived a very long time, and if you've come to many sermons, or maybe even you've heard this poem, I'm going to read you a poem. You might have even heard it at a funeral service. I just want to read to you this. This is called The Gospel According to You. There's a sweet old story translated for me, but writ in the long, long ago. The Gospel according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John of Christ and His mission below. You are writing a gospel, a chapter each day, by deeds that you do and words that you say. Men read what you write, whether faithless or true. Say, what is the gospel according to you? Men read and admire the gospel of Christ with its love so unfailing and true. But what do they say and what do they think of the gospel according to you? 'Tis a wonderful story, the gospel of love, and as it shines in the Christ's life divine. And oh, that its truth might be told again in the story of your life and mine. Unselfish mirrors in every scene, love blossoms on every sod, and back from its vision the heart comes to tell the wonderful goodness of God. So you're writing each day a letter to men. Take care that the writing is true. 'Tis only the gospel some men will read, and that is the gospel according to you. You may have heard that before, and that's an encouragement for us to understand and know that people watch us. Those of us who profess Christ and have clothed ourselves with Christ in baptism, people watch us, and they see how we act, they see how we live, they get an understanding of what Christ's love is like just by what they see from us. And sometimes that's good and sometimes that's not so good. Because I realize that there are times when we mess up. And just because there are times we mess up, that doesn't stop the people from seeing us. I want to read to you another gospel. It's called The Gospel According to Amy. And maybe I could actually put your name here instead of her. The first time, and probably the loudest time that I ever felt God's voice, was March the 5th, 1997. I was in my little rent house, and for some reason I was alone. It was the day of my brother's funeral. And I was in the house and I was screaming. I was mad that he died because he had 2 little girls. And he was a good person. And I hadn't been. I was mad that it was not me. And I heard God say, well, what are you going to do now? And it was like a charge to say something like this. Yes, this has happened, so what are you going to do with it? Right after my freshman year of college is when my brother was diagnosed, and he was basically in treatment and had a period of remission. I just didn't want to see him. I didn't want to see him sick. Not wanting to see him go through a bone marrow transplant or see his hair fall out. So I stayed away. and I would binge drink or experiment with drugs. I would do that instead of feeling what it's like to have your brother so sick. So essentially, my parents were not only losing their son, but I had distanced myself further and further from them and from my family. I'd actually stopped going to school, not answering my phone, not going to family dinners. Well, what I know now that was happening then was there was a large group of people praying for both of us. Of course, for my brother, praying for healing, for they were praying for me that I would return. I think that what we can learn from my journey is for families. The last thing my mom taught me, and she didn't knock on my door every day and say, "Hey, you got to stop doing this," but she prayed for me. And she didn't give up praying for me. And I think, what else can we learn? And I think we can learn forgiveness and reconciliation. And even though I did those things, I had a whole family and a whole group of people who offered forgiveness. I was angry with God. If He had actually been in that room that day, I probably would have tried to knock him over. But He listened to me. He still had something to say to me. Do something with your hurt. So I think if I can make a good thing come out of a bad experience, it's helpful for the other person, but it's just as helpful for me. And being able to do the things that I've done with hospice was probably just as healing for me as it was for the people that I had helped. I was fortunate to have people love me when I was at my worst. I was fortunate to have people love me when I was at my darkest. And I believe, because of what I've experienced, that I have the ability to do that for others right now. This is the gospel according to Amy. We're going to look at a passage in Mark. And it's one of those passages that actually help us find out if we become too cozy with the Bible. Too nonchalant with reading through Scripture, where we just kind of read through and just pass over stuff. Because this passage in several ways is kind of troubling. And I read through it, and I kind of get a little frustrated a little bit if I stop and think about it for too long. So frankly, I'm guilty of just kind of reading through it and just reading past it. And just picking out a cool point here or there and sharing that with somebody. Every once in a while, I really have to make my mind focus and say, what am I missing? Mark chapter 9, verse 14. When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them, and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet Him. "What are you arguing with them about?" He asked. A man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought you my son, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." "You unbelieving generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So they brought him. And when the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us. Help us." If you can? Everything is possible for the one who believes. Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, He rebuked the impure spirit. "You deaf and mute spirit," He said, "I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. After Jesus had gone indoors, His disciples asked Him privately, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" And He replied, "This kind can only come out by prayer." They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus didn't want anyone to know where they were because He was teaching His disciples, and He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill Him. And after 3 days, He will rise." But the disciples, they did not understand what He meant, and they were afraid to ask Him about it. We're going to stop there. We'll read a little bit further in just a moment. This passage is a little strange on a couple accounts. First of all, Jesus comes off the Mount of Transfiguration. We didn't read that part, but that's immediately right before this passage. Jesus comes off the Mount of Transfiguration, and He finds His disciples are in an argument. And He says, "What are you guys arguing about?" Well, this man is the one who steps up to answer the question. "I came here, I wanted my son healed, but your disciples couldn't pull it off. They couldn't do it." So Jesus proceeds to heal the boy. The disciples seem a little put off by what happens. Jesus seems a little put off by what happens. Why couldn't they do that? This is a question I'm asking me, right? Why couldn't they do it? You know, it's not like the apostles hadn't healed before. Jesus responds to that question really is, this kind can only come out by prayer. Let me just pause for a second. Well, how are they trying to do it? How are they trying to do it? Were they trying to say some kind of hocus pocus? Did they have the right magical words? Is that what they were doing? Did they find a cool incantation on the internet? I'm asking, what were they doing? Now, I'm being a little silly and flippant about it, I get it, but I'm still trying to figure out, what did they say that didn't work? Jesus said, this kind comes out only by prayer. But that's not the only thing troubling in this passage. Second thing that's a little troubling, first thing was, what were they doing to try to get it out that wasn't working? They'd done it before. The second thing is, when Jesus comes down, He seems to interpret this whole thing in the terms of belief. Right? He says apparently that whatever this casting out thing that's going on isn't working because there doesn't seem to be sufficient faith there. And that kind of bothers me. It bothers me. I don't know if it bothers you. It bothers me a little bit. So what's the deal? Is there a sufficient faith level? Is there a gauge somewhere that's going up, and when I have enough faith, then all of a sudden I'm able to do stuff that before I got to that level I couldn't do? If you can just get your faith up to a certain level, do you experience healing in your life that you didn't otherwise? If you just get enough people praying for you, are you spared? No. If you just get the right Christians praying for you, does that spare you? What is that threshold you got to hit? And it seems the Father, sort of with me, the Father says, okay, I believe. And then He does what many of us would probably do. I believe, sort of. Have you ever prayed like that? You know what I'm saying, right? Have you ever prayed and then went, I believe that, and then you crossed your fingers? I do believe, He said, help me overcome my unbelief. Another thing that's troubling, that's bothersome about this, is that Jesus seems to be a little irritated. I don't know if I read it with irritation in it, and that just makes you think there's irritation there. If you read it and you go through it, does Jesus not seem a little frustrated? He comes down, and they haven't been able to get anything done. They're in this argument, and He says, oh, how long am I going to have to keep putting up with this? Won't you guys ever get it? All right, let's do a little bit of the scholarly thing. Let's remind you of what the book of Mark is about, okay? The book of Mark is about contrasts. It's largely about the contrast between power and the cross. Between power and the cross. And as the story unfolds initially, and you can see this over and over and over when people see Jesus and they come to the feet of Jesus. At the very beginning, one of their first reactions is they're amazed. But we find out in the book of Mark, amazement is not belief. Amazement is not belief. It's just amazement. It becomes belief when people see Jesus, see what He's about, and then follow Him to the cross. And you understand that. This father brings this boy whom he desperately seeks help. Hey, you're those Jesus people. This is kind of my opinion of kind of what happened. Hey, you're those Jesus people. You have the power to heal. Would you heal my boy? And I can see the disciples, the apostles going, sure, I would love to. And then nothing. And they step back, and the teachers of the law step up, and they step back, and they try again. Nothing. And the teachers of the law are going over there. Told you. They can do the easy stuff, can't do the hard stuff. And then there proceeds to be an argument. Oh, I can do this. No, you can't. Yes, I can. No, you can't. Then Jesus comes down, and they all scurry up to Him. This all is what's going on. He looks frustrated because this is all about a discussion of power. Who can do it and who can't? It's frustrating. And basically what Jesus says is, if you really want to exercise power in this world, it's only by realizing that you don't have any. It's only by prayer. Church, let me remind you a little bit about prayer. I'm going to first take you to the Old Testament and then to the New Testament. 2 Chronicles 7, verse 14. You may know this. You may have listened to it in a song, or you may have read it a lot. It reads like this: "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven." And I just want to make sure we understood or heard those two words that are put together. Humble themselves and pray. Seek my face, turn from wicked ways. Now, turn to James chapter 4 now. And you're going to see a little discussion here even about prayer that's really very interesting. James chapter 4 verse 1 reads like this: "What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but you don't have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight." Listen to this. "You don't have because you don't ask God." And listen to this next verse. "When you do ask, you do not receive because you ask with the wrong motives, that you may spread what you get on your own pleasures." Now it's interesting. I want to take us back to Mark. And it's interesting because this whole thing is put around and capsuled in the story of the cross. And I want to show that to you because in verses 14 through 29, it's the healing of the boy. But right before that, we had the transfiguration. And at the transfiguration, we have Jesus being transformed into a glorious likeness. But also there were other figures up there with him. And when they wanted to make kind of places of honor or worship to all three of them, Jesus is like, no. And God's like, no, it's my son that's important here. And then Jesus comes straight down from that. They're arguing about who's got the power to heal this guy. And Jesus is like, seriously? Really? This is kind of a belief thing. And I want to pause in here and say, and it's also a where are you getting your power thing and what you trying to prove thing. And so we have the healing of the boy through verse 29, and then in verses 30 to 32, as Jesus is trying to teach them, right after this, as they're walking along the road, He tells them He's got to go to the cross and He's got to die. And He's got to be risen. Now I'll just stop for a little bit. I would love to have the power just to heal somebody. I admit it. I would love to be able to speak the word and leukemia is done. Alzheimer's disappears. Epilepsy is gone. Who wouldn't want that? Even in the minds of the apostles, who wouldn't want that? But let me just pause and say something else. I think there's something deeper and bigger going on than being able to cure a disease. Now I'm going to be on the verge of saying something that is utterly ridiculous. You ready? I think that sometimes us as Christians are preoccupied with the miraculous and trying to figure out if God did or didn't do something in our life today, so much so that we've lost the message. We've lost the signal. We've missed what He's trying to say to us. We're trying to figure out if He did something awesome that I can go, yes, and now I get something. And we're too concerned about whether my prayer really affected somebody else. And we're like, yeah, because I'm the righteous guy that talks about in James. You know, the prayer of a righteous man avails much. So He asked me to pray for you. It's going to be awesome. And we miss what God's trying to tell us. If you want real power, then you got to know it ain't from you. And I'm a little embarrassed sometimes because the world looks at us going, seriously? I think we may have lost sight of the purpose of miracles and sometimes even the purpose of prayer. The purpose of prayer isn't to bend God's will to my will. The purpose of prayer is to bend my will to His will in humility. I know that my own prayer life has changed over the years. And maybe it's become a weird thing to most people if I kind of told you what it was like. I don't know. Usually I don't pray out loud unless I'm praying in public. I just keep my mouth shut. Usually I'd rather just be sitting down or hiding somewhere. I'd rather just be by myself. And I've found that the older I get, I don't have demands on God. And maybe you have found that you don't try to put your expectations on God when you pray. Maybe you have found that your agenda has become second to His agenda. And maybe you found that really you just want to sit down and be with Him. You know what I'm talking about? You just want to sit by Him. It's kind of like sometimes you just want to sit by your wife. You can be watching a movie and you just want to sit by her. You don't have to be talking about anything. You could be doing nothing. You just want to sit by her. We just want to be there, and when we're done, we come down off that mountain with God, and then we'll see what is there we can do. And hopefully, we look a little more like God, the God we worship. I want you to think with me about this father. He had this child all his life who comes with great expectations only to be really disappointed. And then to have Jesus chide him a little bit by saying, "Seems like you got some belief issues." And for him to say, I know. Please help those parts where I don't believe like I should. So here's what I'm going to say. Quit trafficking in your own power. Quit believing in your own manipulation. Quit understanding that your own control is where it's at. And take courage and follow Jesus and just see what happens. And let His will be the one that we bend to. And make the choice to turn from sin in your life. Make that choice. Make that outright choice to turn from sinful ways and allow God's grace to wash over you and wash your sins away. Allow His strength to help you in your daily walk. For frankly, if we left it up to our own control, the light of the kingdom would grow really dark because we don't have the power to keep it lit in and of ourselves. Church, you may have found that out by the way life has been. You may have understood that by the way sin has taken a hold on you. And you may need the prayers of this church. You may need the forgiveness that comes in baptism. You may need to become a child of His. That may be where you are. I don't know. But what I do know is when we try to do it on our own, it ain't going to happen. But when we surrender to His will in everything that we do, especially beginning at the humility we have in our prayer life, that we will become His people. We'll be clothed in Him, and we will walk in His ways. If you have a need, come while we stand and while we sing.